Do you believe in time travel? What if we told you right now that there are real, documented cases that prove exactly that? If you're thinking that time travel only exists in movies, and that there must be a logical explanation for everything, then we're already very curious to see how you'll explain these 10 mysterious cases. So let's jump straight into the first case, and this one is absolutely mind-blowing. Number 10. The Woman from Torenza. This case spread across the world at incredible speed and sparked heated debates in a very short time. At the center of it all is a woman who allegedly came from a country that exists on no map and has never been registered in any official database. The incident is said to have taken place at John F. Kennedy International Airport in New York. A seemingly ordinary woman approached passport control and handed the officers a document that, at first glance, looked like an official biometric passport. A routine procedure, the kind that happens thousands of times every single day. But within seconds, the officers realized that something wasn't right. The passport was issued by a country called Torenza. There was just one problem. No officer, no system, and no database could find a country by that name. International registers, diplomatic directories, and geographic databases returned nothing. At first, the staff assumed it might be a typo or perhaps a little-known microstate. But the more closely they examined the passport, the more puzzling the situation became. The document appeared high quality, complete, and professionally issued. Security features, biometric data, and even entry stamps were present. Everything looked real, precisely crafted, and technologically up to date. The woman herself seemed surprised by the officer's confusion. Calmly and firmly, she explained that Torenza was a real country. According to her, it was located in the Caucasus region, between several well-known nations. She didn't appear confused, panicked, or like someone trying to deceive anyone. To her, it seemed completely natural that her home country existed and was internationally recognized. But nothing showed up in the authorities' systems. No record, no diplomatic registration, no geographic classification. Absolutely nothing. As the officers tried to determine whether the passport was a forgery, the situation grew increasingly mysterious. It couldn't simply be dismissed as a cheap fake. The document looked too detailed, too precise, and too technically sophisticated to be nothing more than a forgery. At the same time, the woman stuck to her story, explaining that she had left and re-entered this country multiple times, just as if it were any ordinary state. Some observers began to propose a theory. What if it wasn't a forgery? What if this woman had actually come from a reality in which this country exists? A parallel world, an alternative timeline, a version of Earth with slightly altered geography and a different political structure. Speculation like this spread quickly across the internet and generated massive attention. Many were reminded of a much older story, the legend of the man from Taured, who allegedly appeared in the 1950s with a passport from a country that doesn't exist and is still considered one of the most famous parallel world cases to this day. Back then as well, it was about a country that seemed real and yet existed nowhere. But the more the story spread, the greater the doubts became. Some suspected the video might have been staged. Others believed it was a modern version of older time travel legends. To this day, it remains unclear where this footage actually came from and who created it. The alleged passport from Torenza could not be linked to any existing country. At the same time, it was never conclusively proven who was behind the video or how exactly it was made. And that is precisely what makes this case so fascinating. Because even if it turns out to be an elaborately constructed story, it raises a compelling question. How would we react if someone suddenly appeared with documents from a country that doesn't exist in our world? Would we immediately assume it's a fake? Or would we at least consider, even for a brief moment, that our reality might not be the only one? A truly, truly fascinating thought. And believe me, this was only the beginning. The truly shocking cases are still ahead of us. Subscribe to the channel and give this video a like. It's completely free, and helps us continue creating videos like this. Thank you very much. Number 9. Are UFOs actually time travelers from our future? This case is particularly fascinating. Why? Because it isn't based on anonymous videos or internet rumors, but on the considerations of a renowned scientist. Jacques Vallée, a French astrophysicist and computer scientist, spent decades studying the UFO phenomenon and arrived at a theory that makes many things appear in a completely new light. He asked a simple but radical question. What if UFOs aren't visitors from distant planets at all? Most people automatically think of spacecraft from outer space when they hear the word UFO, beings traveling across light years just to visit us. But while analyzing countless reports, Vallée noticed something that didn't quite fit the classic space narrative. Many of these objects appeared suddenly, moved in ways that are almost impossible to explain physically, and then vanished again, as if they had only briefly touched our reality. It seemed less like flight through the sky, and more like a shift between levels of existence. This is exactly where his so-called interdimensional hypothesis comes in. According to this theory, UFOs could originate from other realities, or even from other times. Perhaps multiple versions of our world exist alongside each other. Perhaps there are timelines that occasionally overlap. And perhaps UFO sightings are precisely those points of intersection. Some researchers took this idea even further. They speculated that these visitors aren't alien beings at all, but us. Humans from a very distant future. A future in which humanity is extremely technologically advanced, yet no longer looks the way it does today. A completely crazy thought. At first, this theory may sound entirely absurd, but it follows a certain logic. As technology continues to evolve over thousands of years, it gradually takes over more and more tasks. Physical labor becomes unnecessary. Artificial intelligence makes decisions. Humans live longer, move less, and increasingly merge with technology. Some researchers suspect that the human body could eventually change for the worse as a result. Perhaps it will become smaller, more fragile, or less resilient. A highly advanced civilization could be technologically almost perfect, yet biologically weakened or even degenerated. And now it gets very interesting. Because if a future humanity realizes that it has regressed too far, it might try to address the problem at its root. And that root lies in the past, in our present, in a time when the human body is still genetically stable and unchanged. Some UFO researchers therefore interpret certain abduction reports in a completely new way. People repeatedly describe medical examinations, the taking of samples, or strange experiments carried out by so-called greys. Within this theory, these beings wouldn't be classic extraterrestrials, but future humans trying to correct their own biological future. An absolutely insane idea. They wouldn't come to conquer us, but to study, to analyze, perhaps even to save themselves. Of course, there is no evidence for any of this, yet the idea is more coherent than it first appears. It explains why UFOs often seem to bypass our physics, why they appear and disappear without visible propulsion, and why the beings seen inside them often look surprisingly similar to us. Jacques Vallée himself was very careful with his statements. He never claimed to know the answer, but he was convinced that the UFO phenomenon cannot simply be explained as visitors from outer space. To him, much of it pointed toward layers of reality, consciousness, and perhaps even time itself, and that is exactly what makes this case so incredibly fascinating. Because if some of these phenomena actually originate from our own future, then they aren't observing us out of mere curiosity, but out of pure necessity. And if they really are here to correct something, then we inevitably have to ask ourselves the following question. What exactly went so wrong in their future that they had to return to our time? What's coming next is so unbelievable that you'll probably want to listen to it at least twice. Before we continue, a quick question for you. If you could travel to another time for one day, which year would you choose? Just write the year in the comments below. We're already very curious to see your answers. Number 8. The Mysterious Playground. This case is anything but a classic time travel story. It isn't about machines, secret experiments, or individuals claiming to be from the future. Instead, everything revolves around an ordinary-looking playground, and several children who claimed they saw a portal to another world there. That premise alone already sounds pretty crazy. But what the children reported turned this incident into one of the strangest cases ever associated with alternative realities and parallel worlds. In the 1980s, something is said to have happened on a small playground in France, surrounded by residential buildings and trees, something no one could explain. Several children who were playing there independently later reported a strange phenomenon in the ground. They described a glowing, blue, shimmering opening that had suddenly appeared. Not an ordinary hole, not a dip in the ground, but rather a stable-looking tunnel made of light, a tunnel that, according to their accounts, looked like a real passageway. The children didn't describe this as a fleeting illusion, but as something tangible, as if a shimmering gateway had opened right in the middle of the playground. Some of them reported that this portal didn't simply look like a hole leading downward, but more like a glowing tunnel. Not into the earth, but into a completely different reality. And this is exactly where the case becomes especially unsettling. Several children independently claimed that they had approached this tunnel. Some even said they had jumped into it, or at least partially stepped through. What they supposedly experienced there is very, very interesting. They spoke of a world filled with intense colors, glowing structures, and an environment that felt distinctly different from our reality. Some described an open landscape made of light. Others reported floating forms, bright structures, and an atmosphere that felt both calm and alien at the same time. There were no buildings in the traditional sense. Instead, they saw flowing, almost living shapes that constantly shifted and seemed to emit light themselves. But the most striking aspect wasn't what they described. It was how similar their accounts were. Many of the children barely knew each other, and yet they independently reported the same blue tunnel, the same world of light, and the same impressions. These similarities made the case particularly mysterious, because how likely is it that multiple children would invent the exact same story without coordinating beforehand? If we're being honest, that's extremely unlikely. Adults initially dismissed their statements as imagination or as a shared game that had taken on a life of its own. But the more children were questioned, the clearer it became that their descriptions overlapped in crucial details. That is exactly what led to the location itself being examined more closely. The playground, and especially the spot where the children claimed to have seen the portal, was later inspected by adults and local authorities. The ground was examined, and the surroundings were analyzed. But nothing unusual could be found. No geological irregularities, no technical installations, no signs of a natural phenomenon. Everything appeared completely normal, and that is precisely what, for some, intensified the mysterious nature of this case. So what exactly had the children seen? A few experts took the incident more seriously than most. They pointed out that there have been recurring reports around the world of so-called portal phenomena, short-lived tunnels of light or passageways that suddenly appear in certain locations and then vanish again. Such reports are highly controversial, yet they continue to surface across different cultures and time periods. Could the experience on that playground have been one of these phenomena? A briefly open tunnel, a transition into another reality? There is no evidence to support that. And yet, one question remains. A question that has never been answered to this day. How were so many children able to independently describe the same tunnel and the same foreign world? Was it imagination, a collective experience? Or did these children actually see a portal, if only for a brief moment, leading into another world? Who knows? Are you ready for an escalation? Then pay very close attention now. Number 7. The Man from the Year 4040. An unknown man claimed to have traveled to a future in which almost all of humanity no longer exists. A future shaped by war, artificial intelligence, and alien life forms. This man, who described himself as a scientist from Siberia, explained in a video that he and a colleague had developed a time machine, a device that makes it possible to move deliberately to other points in time. According to his own account, he used this machine to travel far into the future, to the year 4040. But what he claimed to have seen there, he described as deeply disturbing. When he arrived in that time, he said he found himself in a destroyed world, ruins, abandoned cities, and an environment he described as dangerous and unstable. He claimed he moved carefully through the remains of this world, constantly afraid of being discovered. And then he made a discovery that completely shook him. He said he encountered dead extraterrestrial beings that were definitely not from Earth. According to his story, however, they had not come as enemies. In the year 2458, he claimed, contact with another galaxy had been established for the first time. The extraterrestrial visitors had been forced to leave their home planet and were searching for a new place to live. At the same time, they brought enormous technological knowledge with them to humanity. He described them as humanoid, taller and slimmer than humans, with strikingly large eyes and pale gray skin. Their movements were calm and controlled. At first, communication had only worked through gestures and simple visual signs, but over time, both sides developed a shared language. With their arrival, an age of progress began. Medicine in particular changed radically. Diseases once considered incurable could suddenly be healed within minutes, and humans were able to live up to 200 years thanks to new regenerative procedures. For a time, everything seemed to point toward a perfect future, until things began to change. In the year 3213, the man claimed, humanity developed an artificial intelligence that surpassed anything that had ever existed before. Initially intended as a support system, it became increasingly powerful and independent. Over time, it began making its own decisions and developing complex strategies. Eventually, it reached a point where it was no longer subordinate to humans. According to his account, this led to a global conflict, a horrific escalation between humans, machines, and the alien allies who had once helped them. By the time he arrived in the year 4040, Earth had already been severely scarred. Robots had devastated large parts of the planet. Cities lay in ruins, and many regions had become uninhabitable. He claimed that more than half of the world's population had been wiped out in these conflicts. To him, it was clear that the greatest threat to humanity did not come from the outside, but from its own creation. He issued a strong warning about the rapid development of artificial intelligence and described it as the greatest danger to humanity's future. A technology that was originally intended to improve life could one day spiral out of control. Whether this man actually traveled into the future cannot be proven. His story remains a claim. Yet some of his statements seem less far-fetched today than one might initially think. Artificial intelligence is already developing at an astonishing pace. Technological systems are becoming increasingly complex and autonomous, and that raises a disturbing question. What if a highly advanced future truly begins as a golden age, before it transforms into something no one can control anymore? Will artificial intelligence ultimately become humanity's downfall? An absolutely horrifying thought. If you thought that was already crazy, then wait until you hear what's coming next. Number 6. The Hoia Baciu Forest. In the heart of Romania, near the city of Cluj-Napoca, lies a forest that has been considered one of the most mysterious places in Europe for decades. The Hoia Baciu Forest is often referred to as the Bermuda Triangle of Europe, and not without reason, because in this forest, people are said to have vanished without a trace. Watches have reportedly stopped for no apparent reason. Cameras have suddenly failed, even though they had been working perfectly just moments before. and at the center of the forest lies a perfectly circular clearing where absolutely nothing grows, as if the ground itself is hiding something. Extremely mysterious. This case isn't a typical time travel story. Instead, it revolves around numerous experiences that have occurred over many years, all repeatedly pointing to the same enigmatic location deep within this forest. One particularly well-known experience comes from a man who entered the forest in the 1960s with a small group to explore the area. He later reported that they were approaching the central point of the forest when a strong sense of unease suddenly set in. His watch began to malfunction. The hands moved irregularly, and then it stopped. Shortly afterward, a companion's camera failed. The battery was suddenly drained, even though it had been fully charged just minutes earlier. The man also described how the soundscape of the forest suddenly changed. No wind, no birds, no insects. A chilling silence that felt unnatural. As they stepped into the clearing, he said that for a brief moment he had the feeling that the environment seemed shifted. Not visibly different, but wrong. As if reality itself had slightly moved out of place. After their quick return, they realized that several hours had passed, even though they felt they had been gone for no more than an hour. Yet none of them could explain what had happened during that time. Reports like these led to an intriguing theory that continues to be discussed to this day. Some researchers and fringe scientists suspect that certain places on Earth could be so-called portal zones. Areas where geomagnetic fields, underground rock formations, or tectonic tensions might trigger unusual effects. Some speak of energetic nodes where space and time could behave in unstable ways. The theory doesn't necessarily claim that a visible hole opens there. Instead, it suggests that such portals might function like invisible transitions. Zones where perception, the sense of time, or even physical processes may temporarily become disrupted. What's interesting is that the clearing at the center of the Hoia Baciu Forest has been studied for decades. The soil has been analyzed, measuring devices have been used, and samples have been taken. Officially, nothing supernatural has ever been detected. No radioactive radiation, no toxic substances, no clear geological anomalies, and yet nothing seems able to truly thrive on that patch of land. In modern mystery and paranormal subcultures, the forest is now considered a so-called hotspot of unexplained phenomena. Many visitors report eerie apparitions, shadow figures, or the strange sensation of being watched. For this reason, the Hoia Baciu Forest is often described as one of the most haunted places in Europe. Some go even further. There is a belief that a portal exists at the center of the forest, a passage that occasionally opens and closes, a gateway that doesn't just lead into other dimensions, but might also allow something from there to enter our world. Some claim that this very portal is the reason for the many reports of dark figures, strange noises, and unexplained phenomena. The theory behind it is as fascinating as it is terrifying. If there are places where space and time are unstable, temporary transitions could form there. Transitions through which not only energy or information might flow, but perhaps something else as well. Something that doesn't belong here. Of course, there is no scientific evidence for this, and yet the idea persists to this day. Maybe it's just a forest with unusual environmental conditions. Maybe electromagnetic fields influence our perception. Or maybe there truly are places on Earth where our reality isn't as stable as we believe. And if such a passage really exists at the center of this forest, then one final unsettling question arises. What if it doesn't just lead outward, but also inward? A very terrifying thought. The next case will take us to the very limits of what we consider possible. Number 5. The man who received information from another dimension. Philip K. Dick was not an unknown figure, not an internet myth, and not a self-proclaimed prophet. He was a celebrated science fiction author whose works later inspired world-famous films such as Minority Report, Total Recall, and Blade Runner. His stories revolved around manipulated realities, artificial identities, and fragile timelines. But in the mid-1970s, he suddenly began to claim that these ideas were no longer just fiction, but were based on a mysterious experience that changed his own life forever. In 1974, after a dental operation, he was given strong pain medication. When a young woman brought him the medication, she was wearing a gold necklace with a Christian fish symbol. The moment his eyes focused on that symbol, Dick described an experience that he later called overwhelming and absolutely real. He spoke of a sudden stream of information that burst into his consciousness like a flash of light. To him, it felt as if knowledge was being transmitted directly, complete and immediate, without him having worked for it. He later referred to this event simply as 2374. From that moment on, he began to question his entire understanding of reality. Philip K. Dick claimed that he suddenly had access to information he could not rationally explain. Complex connections about reality, history, and time suddenly became clear to him. He described his consciousness as a receiver picking up signals from another level, not from space, but from time itself. He developed the belief that time does not flow linearly, but that past, present, and future all exist simultaneously. To him, time was not a stream, but a vast field of information in which all events already exist. Our brain filters this field and allows us only a limited, linear perception. But under certain circumstances, he believed, this filter can be broken, allowing consciousness to access information that actually lies outside our current moment. He described reality as multiple overlapping layers, of which we normally perceive only one. But when these layers briefly overlap, information from another timeline could enter our perception. This idea led him to an even more radical concept. He began speaking of a source he called Vallis, the vast, active, living intelligence system. A massive, active, living intelligence that exists outside our normal space-time structure. For him, Vallis was not a metaphor, but a higher-level information system that perceives past, present, and future simultaneously and can, under certain circumstances, communicate with human consciousness. And then something happened that reinforced his conviction even more. Philip K. Dick later said that he told a woman her baby was suffering from a previously undetected illness, without any medical training, without prior knowledge, simply as a sudden certainty. The mother had her child examined, and according to his account, doctors did indeed discover a serious condition that had gone unnoticed. To him, this was not a coincidence, but a moment in which information from another level of reality had entered his consciousness. This experience made him even more convinced that consciousness is not entirely bound to linear time. If time is an information field, then time travel might be less a physical movement and more an access to other points within that field. Perhaps consciousness itself is the true vehicle that can navigate between past, present, and future. He claimed that we exist in multiple realities simultaneously, while consciously perceiving only one of them. And if that is true, then intuition, premonitions, or sudden insights might not be coincidences, but brief accesses to other levels of time. Philip K. Dick was fully aware of how unbelievable his statement sounded. He once said, in essence, that there were only two possibilities. Either he had lost his mind, or he had briefly seen how reality truly works. But how did Philip K. Dick even know that the baby had a serious illness? Did this man actually receive information from other times or dimensions? Was he truly in direct contact with higher beings? Or did he simply have an exceptionally vivid imagination? The next case sounds like something straight out of a science fiction movie, with the difference that it is real and documented. Number 4. The Secret Time Machine. What if time isn't just a dimension, but a real force. A force that can be measured, concentrated, and even influenced. This fascinating question was asked in the 1960s by a Soviet astrophysicist whose ideas left even experienced scientists completely speechless. His name was Nikolai Aleksandrovich Kozyrev, a highly respected researcher specializing in stars and cosmic processes. But the deeper he explored the mechanisms of the universe, the stronger his conviction became that physics had overlooked a crucial factor. Time, he believed, is not just a measure of change. Time itself is a physical force. A very, very interesting claim. To us, time feels like something abstract. We measure it, we experience it, but we cannot touch or feel it. Kozyrev, however, suspected that time possesses real properties and exerts influence on matter. To him, it wasn't a passive background, but an active element driving very important processes in the universe. Without time, there would be no movement, no development, no change. But if time makes all of that possible, why should it itself be completely without effect? His conclusion was quite radical. Time must be a form of energy. To test this intriguing idea, Kozyrev developed specialized measuring instruments capable of detecting even the smallest changes in energy. The core of his research consisted of so-called torsion balances and extremely sensitive sensors that were not designed to measure light, magnetism, or heat, but direct effects of time processes. His assumption was simple but bold. If time is a real force, it must leave traces that can be measured physically. Then he made a puzzling observation that called everything into question. Kozyrev aimed his instruments at distant stars. Normally we see stars as they were many years ago, because their light takes time to reach us. But according to his records, his devices reacted not only to the incoming light, but to the star's actual current position in the universe. His instruments appeared to respond to events happening in that very moment, even before their light had reached Earth. That would mean information was being transmitted faster than light. According to classical physics, that should be impossible. Kozyrev therefore suspected that time itself functions as a carrier of information. If time is a real force, it could connect events instantly, regardless of distance in space. Past, present, and future would then be far more closely linked than we can imagine. But he didn't stop there. He also developed special metal constructions later known as Kozyrev mirrors. These were spiral-shaped or concave aluminum structures designed to function like antennas for time energy. Kozyrev assumed that time, much like light, could be concentrated or reflected. These mirrors were meant to do exactly that: focus time processes and make them measurable. In later experiments, some researchers reported that people inside such constructions experienced unusual perceptions. They spoke of heightened intuition, intense inner imagery, and the feeling of receiving information that did not originate from their immediate surroundings. None of this was ever scientifically confirmed, but it strengthened the myth surrounding Kozyrev's inventions. Until his death, he remained firmly convinced that time plays an active role in the universe. To him, it was not an abstract concept, but a medium that transmits energy and possibly even information. If that is true, then time wouldn't simply be something that passes. It would be a fundamental force connecting everything. And this is where it becomes truly interesting. Because if time really is a real active energy, could it one day be harnessed? Could information be sent or received through time? Perhaps even events influenced before they occur? Kozyrev himself never openly spoke of time travel in the classical sense, but his experiments left open a possibility that still echoes today. Maybe time isn't a straight path, but a complex field, and maybe Nikolai Kozyrev was one of the few scientists who seriously attempted to unravel this mystery. Was he simply far ahead of his time? Or was he already operating at the edge of something humanity still cannot comprehend? And now we come to a case that surpasses everything you've heard so far. Number 3. The woman who saw the year 2033. This case is both fascinating and deeply unsettling because it doesn't revolve around a distant future, but around our immediate one. More precisely, the year 2033, and what supposedly awaits us in just a few years, according to a mysterious audio recording, is anything but reassuring. At the center of it all is a recording from 1966. Decades later, it was released by a well-known mystery YouTube channel and immediately sparked intense debate. In the recording, an elderly woman can be heard describing a strange experience in a fragile voice, an experience she herself could barely comprehend. At the time of the recording, she was said to be 88 years old. She explained that one day she suddenly experienced something like a vision, not an ordinary thought, not a typical dream. Instead, she described the feeling as if her consciousness had been lifted out of normal reality and transported somewhere else. She had the impression that she was no longer standing on Earth, but hovering above it, as if she were observing the entire planet from a foreign perspective. What she then saw, according to her account, was deeply disturbing, because the world no longer appeared to be a natural planet with oceans, forests, and cities. Instead, everything looked like a gigantic artificial system. She described Earth as some kind of enormous computer. Everywhere, there were structures stretching for miles that resembled cables or connections. The entire planet seemed to be filled with glowing colors, almost as if it were radiating from within. To her, it felt as though the world was no longer organically grown, but had become part of a massive technological network. As she observed this unimaginable scene, she felt a strong sense of presence. She said she sensed that she was in the presence of an all-knowing being, something that was monitoring, or perhaps even controlling, this vast system. She couldn't see it, but she was convinced it was there. Shortly afterward, her vision took an even more shocking turn. She reported seeing so-called machine humans, beings that moved like humans, but apparently weren't. At the same time, she perceived other entities that she could only describe as beings from other worlds. Between these different entities, there seemed to be conflict. She saw images of battles, explosions, and destruction, scenes she described as extremely frightening and chaotic. In the middle of this apparent glimpse into the future, she suddenly heard a voice, very clear, distinct, and without any explanation. The voice spoke only a single sequence of numbers: 2, 0, 3, 3, nothing more. The woman herself was unsure what these numbers were meant to signify, but she suspected that they most likely referred to a year, the year 2033, a point in time that, from her perspective back then, still lay far in the future, yet for us today, appears surprisingly close. After this mysterious message, the vision changed once again. The dark and chaotic images faded and gave way to a completely different atmosphere. She described suddenly finding herself in a kind of utopian world, a place within this gigantic system where there were no conflicts, no fear, and nothing negative. A reality where seemingly everything was possible, and where a perfect order prevailed. But just as suddenly as the experience had begun, it ended. Everything went dark. The impressions vanished. And when she opened her eyes, she found herself back in her own home, in her own time, as if nothing had happened. Was it merely an intense dream? A fantasy? Or did this woman actually experience a brief glimpse into a possible future of our world? And if that mysterious number truly represents a specific year, then one unsettling question remains. What exactly will happen in the year 2033? And that was still harmless. The next case will shatter every limit of imagination. Number 2, the mysterious man from the year 2030. This case is by far one of the most well-known time travel stories of recent years, and at the same time, one of the most disturbing. Because unlike many other alleged time travelers, this young man didn't speak about medieval eras or distant galaxies. He claimed to come from our near future, specifically the year 2030. He called himself Noah. His face was blurred in interviews and his voice was distorted. He appeared in several videos and spoke with remarkable confidence about a future that is said to be only a few years away from our present. But what he described was anything but reassuring. Noah claimed that artificial intelligence would undergo a development in the coming years that would surpass anything we can currently imagine. He spoke of systems that wouldn't just automate individual tasks, but would dominate nearly all societal structures. Governments, the economy, infrastructure, everything, he said, would increasingly be controlled by extremely powerful AI systems. From today's perspective, such statements don't even seem that far-fetched. Artificial intelligence has already begun to penetrate more and more areas of our lives and is evolving at a pace that even many experts find astonishing. And according to him, this is only the beginning. He claimed that he hadn't only experienced the year 2030, but had even traveled as far as the year 6000, a time in which humanity no longer exists as we know it. He described a world where biological and artificial intelligence have completely merged, a reality in which technological systems no longer serve merely as tools, but as a higher authority. What fascinated many people most was his alleged proof. In one of the interviews, Noah showed an X-ray image of his hand. According to him, it revealed a small device, an implant that enables him to travel through time. This device, he explained, is standard in his era for certain programs and functions as a kind of key or interface for time manipulation. Extremely interesting. He claimed that the implant works like a temporal anchor. It allows him, through specific processes, to jump to other points in time without his body being destroyed. The details remained vague, but he stated that time travel in his era is not publicly accessible and is instead strictly controlled. Even more shocking were his statements about the distant future. In the year 6000, Noah said, the world is barely recognizable. Cities still exist, but not in the form we know. Much is controlled by higher-level systems. Human freedom of decision has not completely disappeared, but it is heavily restricted by omnipresent AI structures. He spoke of a global network that connects not only data, but consciousness itself. A world in which artificial intelligence doesn't just calculate, but plans, directs, and optimizes, entirely without human emotion. Interestingly, Noah did not appear uncertain or dramatic in his statements. He spoke calmly, sometimes almost matter-of-factly. And that is exactly what made the story so unsettling for many, because he presented his future not as a catastrophe, but as a logical development. In some interviews, he even underwent a lie detector test. According to the published results, he passed these tests without any problems. Whether these tests were conducted under controlled conditions, however, remains unclear. Still, for many viewers, it appeared to be an additional piece of evidence. Of course, there are massive doubts surrounding his story. Critics point to a lack of evidence and contradictory details. Yet despite all the skepticism, what he described remains extremely intriguing. What if his statements about artificial intelligence are true? Even today, we can already see how AI systems are penetrating more and more areas of life. Automation, autonomous systems, self-learning algorithms, much of what Noah described doesn't seem entirely impossible. And that is exactly where the real tension of this case lies. Is Noah simply a skilled storyteller who perfectly staged the developments and fears of our time? Or is he someone who actually caught a glimpse of a future we are only just beginning to enter? If technologies that can influence time truly exist, would we ever find out about them? Or would that be kept strictly secret? And if artificial intelligence really does become the dominant force one day, will it be our tool? Or will we become theirs? Ready for the finale? Then pay very close attention. Number 1. The Time Slip of Kersey, October 1957. In October 1957, three 15-year-old Royal Navy cadets, William Lang, Michael Crowley, and Ray Baker, were on a training exercise in the English county of Suffolk when they experienced something in the small village of Kersey that would later become one of the most famous so-called time slip cases in Britain. The trip itself was uneventful. A normal exercise, a march through the countryside, nothing unusual. Even back then, Kersey already felt like a village from another time, with old timber-framed houses, narrow streets, and a quiet, almost nostalgic atmosphere. But as the three boys walked through the main street, their perception of the surroundings began to change in a way they couldn't explain. The first thing they noticed was the silence. Not the usual quiet of a village, but a dense, unnatural stillness in which every modern sound was missing. No engines, no distant voices, not even the typical background noise you notice even in the calmest places. Shortly afterward, they realized that crucial things had vanished. Cars that should have been there were gone. There were no power lines, no modern signs, no indications of the 1950s. Instead, the village appeared medieval, raw, and neglected, as if it had shifted back into an earlier era. The houses looked older, not restored or maintained, but as if they still existed in their original time. At the same time, no one was visible. No residents, no movement, no sign of life. The entire environment felt abandoned, but not empty in the usual sense. It felt frozen in another period of time. As they continued walking, they noticed a building that looked like an old butcher shop. Inside, they saw animal carcasses hanging from the ceiling, dark and partially decayed. It didn't look like an active store, but more like a place that had existed for a long time and remained stuck in another era. The scene felt real and tangible, yet completely out of place for the year 1957. All three later reported that the situation did not feel like a dream. They were awake, oriented, and fully aware of what was happening around them. That was exactly what made the experience so unsettling. They didn't feel lost or confused. Instead, it felt as if the environment itself no longer belonged to their time. Then normality returned just as abruptly as it had vanished. Sounds came back. Colors appeared normal again. Modern details reappeared. Cars were once again parked in the streets, and the village looked exactly as it had before. There was no visible transition and no clear moment when everything shifted back. The surroundings were simply normal again. Experiences like this are referred to as so-called time slips. The term describes situations in which people feel as if they have briefly entered another era without consciously moving through space. Unlike classic time travel, there is no machine and no deliberate control. It is more like a sudden change in perception, or depending on interpretation, a temporary overlap of different layers of time. Some researchers suspect that time does not flow as linearly as we perceive it. Instead of viewing past, present, and future as strictly separated, they might be more like layers that can briefly merge under certain conditions. When this happens, people might, for a few seconds or minutes, perceive, or even step into, another time without changing location. That is exactly what is said to have happened in October 1957 in Kersey. Three young cadets, an ordinary march, and a brief moment in which their surroundings no longer matched the present. Whether this was a misperception, a psychological phenomenon, or an actual overlap of time remains unexplained to this day. Were these three young cadets truly transported into the past for a brief moment, or is this story nothing more than a legend? What do you think? Is there really more behind these cases than we can imagine? Which case fascinated you the most? Write it in the comments below. We're very curious to hear your opinions. If you enjoyed this video, we'd really appreciate a like and a subscription. Thank you very much.